Kyle, my friend, how are you, sir?
Not bad. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you, man. I've been chomping at the bit for this week's podcast.
Yeah, well, it's a topic of particular interest.
Yes, indeed. Today on the podcast, we're talking psychedelics. Not exactly sure where to start, but I'm very interested to hear what you have in mind here today, Kyle.
Well, I think we had kind of talked about talking not just psychedelics, but altered states of consciousness in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think one place we could kind of start out is the significance of these kind of experiences through, deep into history.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the ways in which people reach psychedelic states of mind without drugs. Because I want to focus mostly on drugs today.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe we could kind of gloss over some of the other things that happen that are similar. And so I have a particular interest in religion. So what I think about are things like Native American rituals, coming of age type rituals where people would send their kids, their boys primarily, when they reach, whatever it is, 12, 13 years of age, they send them out into the wilderness to kind of fend for themselves. And then I'm imagining like the scene from 300 where Leonidas gets kicked with the wolf. Yeah. So this was like a legitimate ritual that we see in tribal societies. But what happens is these kids go out on their own for the first time, and they're not allowed to come back until they have had some sort of mystical experience. And so what happens is these kids go out, they can't really fend for themselves. So they're not sleeping well, they're not eating well. And so they end up having sleep deprivation and food deprivation. And those are two things that lead to that type of experience.
Yeah.
I can vouch for this because when I had my first child, I didn't sleep for like 3 days.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was driving home from the hospital, I completely felt trippy. I felt a little bit messed up.
Sure.
In a weird way, like, the road and the sky and everything as I was driving looked a little funny, felt a little funny.
Okay.
So this is one way that people achieve that type of a state.
Yeah, I've actually felt that before too. I was in high school once, and I was a bad kid in high school, and I would go out drinking at bars, and I did that a couple nights in a row, and hadn't, I would go to bed at like 3 a.m. and then go to school, wake up to go to school at like 6:45. And I remember sitting in a math class, and just the walls around me were just kind of like waving. And I felt like I thought I was going to die. I didn't know,
Oh yeah.
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 So I've experienced that too.
Sure. Yeah. If you've ever had the tequila spins where you lay down and everything was fine a second ago, and suddenly the cosmos are spinning around in front of you, you know what I mean. There's a point where reality changes, and that's what I want to talk about when our kind of ordinary conscious state is somehow different, somehow magical.
Sure.
So I wrote down a couple things. Apart from sleep deprivation and food deprivation, another thing that these ancient people will do is they do what's called ecstatic ricituals. So I'm picturing like African tribes where they dance, and they did this in the North and South America as well, but where they're dancing all day, all night. We're talking 24 hours, 36 hours of dancing to that rhythmic music.
Sounds like an EDM festival.
Whoa! I hadn't really thought of the comparison, but you're exactly right.
Yeah,
I bet that I've never done that, but I bet that's exactly what that experience is like.
There's some kind of connection there. I mean, I think in one of the past episodes, we were kind of talking about good collectivism and just the experience of getting wrapped up in a good concert with a group of people.
Right.
And I definitely think that there's some kind of connection between, I don't know, like these altered states of consciousness and that at a concert.
Right.
I think you're riding some kind of similar wave.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good bridge because you're right. I wanted to ask you about the rhythmic part of the music, because that seems to be what draws people into that state,
Sure.
especially when they're exhausted and they just keep going.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about music, and he talks about how, in the way that Jordan Peterson talks about things, he said that it's, reality is layered and music is layered and, it means something. But I think that there's some kind of truth in that for sure. It's like, these patterns. One of the things I love about the kind of jam music that I like is they build this tension. Like everyone will be like kind of just wailing on their instruments and just building, and then it breaks into this something else, like another pattern, and it's just it's very gratifying. It's it's great.
It's like a release somehow. Like
you feel. I don't know. It is like ecstatic. You said ecstatic ritual.
Yes.
It is. I mean, it can be, anyways.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I know what you mean, though. When you get caught up in that like group, that really intense group experience, and you do lose a little bit of your identity in it, and it's something about that's really pleasant, and that's magnified a 1,000-fold in a psychedelic drug experience.
Sure.
So I don't want to tease the audience. But I don't want to jump right into that necessarily. I think there's a little bit more we could talk about.
Sure. I mean, other types of altered states of consciousness before you even start getting into, and I mean, I think they're interesting because all of these things that we could talk about, like I was talking about with the music just now, there's some kind of connection. Like I said, it's some kind of the same wave, like meditation.
So I'm so sorry, man.
Oh, you're fine.
I don't want
No,
to stop.
good.
But you mentioned Jordan Peterson and the music earlier,
Yeah.
and this brings to mind something else that he said. He talked about how information, and then he breaks that down, saying that what that means is that you're in formation with reality. So when you have information, what that means is there's something useful that corresponds to the way the world really is.
Okay.
And what I wonder about the music experience that we're just talking about is if the harmony that our minds and bodies get into with the music and with everybody around us, if that sort of puts us in the same formation, for lack of a better word, it kind of puts us on the same wavelength, I guess.
Sure.
That there's something about that corresponding to the experience of everybody around you that breaks off that trippy experience.
Yeah, I think what is music? I mean, what is sound? It's vibration.
Right.
And what are we? We're just like, I mean, wait,
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, so we're getting right into the hippy dippy now, but you're right. I mean, we're made of elementary particles and quarks and electrons and those sorts of things, and they're understood as waves.
You ever seen those things where people put like sand or something on a speaker, and then they that like they run some kind of like low frequency sound, and it turns into this like fractal looking.
It looks like a snowflake or something. Every note has its own shape.
Yeah, I don't know how that's connected, but I think that it is somehow.
It's absolutely connected.
Yeah.
But what in the fuck is that?
I don't know. It's the devil, I think.
So every note has its own unique shape, and it is like a weird fractal shape. I mean, I don't know what that is, but we got to get a scientist on this podcast to talk about that.
But just with the music and how that relates to that, I really do. I think that those vibrations get in the air, and I think it just starts moving people in more ways than one, they start dancing physically. And I think that there's a lot of times some other aspect to it, especially when you're on psychedelics. I mean, I don't want to incriminate myself too much on this podcast, but I've done some psychedelics at concerts, and it's pretty awesome,
Yes, indeed. So, you know what? I do feel the obligatory need to say to the audience that this podcast is not an endorsement of any sort of illicit drugs. We are not encouraging anybody to take them. But I do want to talk about our personal experiences with these.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you're good.
Well, the only other thing I wanted to say before we skip over it, because I don't want to forget, is things like dreaming.
Sure.
Things like really high fever, where people will hallucinate, and then seizures.
Yeah.
So these are all different ways where, again, we're talking about a different type of consciousness.
Yeah.
And dreaming is really interesting, and I want to ask you about that. But the seizures one, do you remember, this actually goes back to Jordan Peterson also. He was talking about...
Doesn't it all?
Doesn't it always? He was talking about one of those Russian authors, and it might have been Dostoevsky, but I don't think so.
It's usually Dostoevsky with Peterson.
I think it was somebody else, but he said that he was an author, kind of a failed author, and then he had a seizure, a really bad seizure.
Oh.
And in that seizure, he had a crazy psychedelic experience, which people do say that they experience.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And when he came back from it, he was a genius author at that point. Whatever happened to him during that experience made him like a creative genius.
I mean, it reminds me of like Sam Kinison. Rogan always tells that story. That's interesting. I don't know who that is. That could be Dostoevsky, but I haven't heard that. So, yeah, I mean, as far as the fever dreams and the seizures, I think the one interesting thing that ties in with seizures is that's associated with like witchcraft, like people convulsing.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's interesting.
You're right. Right. Yeah, I mean, so you're right. I mean, I'm thinking about, again, the Salem witch trials, which we dropped as a reference before. But you're right. I mean, somebody who's having a legitimate medical seizure, in a different time without the understanding, they absolutely think that there's some demonic element involved, which strikes me as interesting only because the psychedelic experience in general strikes me as religious.
Sure. Yeah. I think they probably couldn't help it. I mean, you see this person collapse and start convulsing, and that's scary just on the face of it. And then they come back and they start talking about potential visions that they had.
Oh, yeah.
That's
you see that kind of thing with like near-death experiences also.
Sure.
And I haven't done a lot of research or study on that, but people do come back and say, interesting things, and a lot of the things that they see. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today are the visual things that people experience, but they have those sorts of things, when their heart stops, when they have to get resuscitated, that kind of thing.
Researching near-death experiences sounds very dangerous. I don't think that you should do that.
Do you remember that movie with was it called Sleepwalker? No, that was Stephen King. There was a movie with Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts.
Okay, yeah.
And she was a part of a medical research team, a bunch of like graduate students, and they were studying near-death experiences. And do you remember this?
Not really.
They took turns shocking their hearts out of rhythm so that they would die, and then they would give them a certain amount of time dead, and then they would bring them back. And then they would talk about what they experienced while they were dead.
This was in Pretty Woman?
No, it was a Julia Roberts movie.
Oh, okay. I was really confused. I was
sorry,
like, I don't
man,
remember that.
Yeah.
No. I think that's on me. So, as far as the dreams go, I mean, I really don't know what else to say about dreams, but other things that cause altered states that you don't even have to... you said a second ago that you don't want to endorse psychedelics. What I want to say about psychedelics is... just you decide for yourself,
Correct.
I think that's whatever.
Yeah, nobody should ever be pressuring you into something like that. And we'll talk about this more. But the reason is, this is not a peer pressure situation because this is not a recreational situation.
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of, once we do get into talking about the substances, I do kind of want to talk about maybe the pros and the cons of it.
Okay, fair enough.
Because I think it's good to be honest about things. I think it's good to give people the real information that I have.
Oh, absolutely.
Not that I have a ton of it, but I mean, I've got more than some people. So.
Yeah, you're right.
But just back to what I was saying, other altered states of consciousness, there's meditation. That I kind of associate meditation and float tanks and stuff like that kind of in the same.
Yes.
It's like a different kind of meditation. Which I've done float tank a couple of times.
Right. I think we need to shout out to Joe Rogan for that one.
Yeah, man. I mean, pretty much this entire episode, I knew what psychedelics were before Rogan, obviously, but I mean, I've been listening to Rogan for like 10 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he definitely, in the early days, talked a lot about psychedelics and made me realize that they were very interesting.
So I want you to talk about your float taking experience because I want to talk about mine.
Sure.
I do want to mention that when we did hear about the sensory deprivation stuff from Rogan early on, and then you and I, as I recall, for a birthday present, took a trip. We took a drive like an hour or so away to find the nearest float tank place, because at that time those places were not easy to find. I mean, they're everywhere now.
Yeah, they really did blow up. The Rogan effect. Yeah, you know, I really don't remember a whole lot about my actual experience, to be honest with you. Like I said, they're kind of slippery. You know.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think it's whether we're talking about the float tank type of experience or a psychedelic drug experience, coming out of those things, the memories do fade pretty quickly. The images fade. I mean, it's just like a dream. It's very much like a dream. You wake up from a dream, and oftentimes within a few seconds, you know, I think I'm going to be able to write all this down.
Yeah,
and then I blink and I can't remember any of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would say if you know, like if they say if you want to learn to lucid dream, that you should start dream journaling.
Right.
You know? And I would say that if you want to have, and maybe, I don't know, maybe some people would disagree with this, but I would say if you want to gain something from your trips, you have to try to hold on to something. And
yes,
I think that requires at least thinking about it.
Oh yeah.
You know, when you come out of it, and, you know, just kind of contemplating the entire experience.
Yeah. Do you find that the meaning from those types of experiences, they kind of fleshes itself out like in the days and weeks afterwards?
For sure. Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
It is weird. I really don't even know what to make of that, to be honest with you.
You know what I think? I think that we know what the meaning is, but we don't. We know, but we're not aware of it. It's like it slowly starts to make sense. So it's hard to describe. Yeah. And this podcast is going to get hippy dippy, you guys. There's for sure going to be some weird stuff said, but that's how it feels.
I don't know what you're talking about, dude.
It definitely seems like something that. That's, you know what. Next topic.
Well, I mean, just the next topic that I have is just kind of more of these other things. You know, like breath work. You know, people, you basically, it's intentional hyperventilation, you know, and I've done that, and I've only done it a couple times, but I definitely could see the thing about all of these things, like meditation, they call it a practice, and it's because you have to do it. You know, you can't just do it like once and have these experiences. You really have to put in work.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about the psychedelic substances that is interesting, because that's kind of like a bypass to that.
Yes, and I don't want to stop your momentum.
I don't have anything else to say.
Well, a Carl Jung quote popped in my head. So he was asked about psychedelic drugs. So Carl Jung, obviously, we talked about him before, a very famous psychologist. He was asked about psychedelics because the dream images that he was examining and the images in mythology, they correspond to a lot of things that people talk about from psychedelic experiences. And when they asked Jung about that, he said something to the tune of beware of anything valuable that comes too easy.
Okay.
So take that with a grain of salt, but it's definitely a shortcut.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there is something to that. Beware of anything that comes too easy, and I think maybe part of that is, you know, kind of the reputation that, you know, the reputation that psychedelics have now is kind of reforming. You know, they're kind of getting more of a positive vibe. But before that, it was just like dumb teenagers in trailers, you know, taking mushrooms and doing stupid stuff. But I think that there's something to that. I really do think that these substances should be used respectfully. I mean, you know, I think that I don't think that there's a lot of danger, to be honest with you, but I think that there is some. Right.
I mean, you hear about people, and you know, these people are usually people who have a history of mental health disorders or something like that.
Sure.
But you do hear about people who take psychedelics and they never recover.
Yeah.
But it's never happened to me.
You know what you don't hear about?
What?
People taking psychedelics and becoming addicted to them.
That's also very true. In
They're
fact,
like anti-addictive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So some of those iboga and some of those like those harder to find. I think they're African psychedelics. They're used medically for exactly that reason, to break people from other addictions like opiates and things that
nicotine,
that are very difficult to break.
Yeah. Ibogaine.
Ibogaine, that's another one. Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's funny to me that, you ever heard the story about Hunter S. Thompson?
I don't. Let's hear it.
He covered politics back in the day, and there was this guy running for president named Ed Muskie that Hunter didn't like. So he started this rumor that he was going down to South America to take this drug Ibogaine, and it actually kind of ruined the guy's political
really?
that campaign. Yeah.
Wow.
But I just think it's funny that Ibogaine, like, if I heard that a politician was going to take Ibogaine, I'd be like, all right. I'll look into this guy.
Yeah, that would be a very good thing today, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, let me ask you this, because we started talking about float tank, and before we get away from it, where we left off there was you saying that you don't really remember much from it.
Yeah.
But what do you remember? Anything? Was it visual at all for you?
There was some visual stuff. More than anything, it was like a disassociated, like a feeling of, one of the people that I have down to talk about in this podcast is Huxley. And
oh, yes.
Aldous Huxley. And he talks about in the book, The Doors of Perception, something called mind at large. And that's kind of what I felt like. I felt like I was just my consciousness, and I was like integrated back into things, kind of.
Oh, yeah.
So
I think that mind at large concept is the same as what people call the collective unconscious or cosmic consciousness. That's another thing that I've heard.
Got it.
I think we're talking about the same thing. One interesting tidbit about Huxley is that The Doors of Perception, the book that we're talking about, that was where the band The Doors got their name from.
Come on, baby, light my fire. Love that band. They're, one of my favorites of all time.
So I'm sorry, we're talking about what was visual. Do you remember any of the specifics?
Not really, to be honest with you. I do remember one thing that I remember, and it's like the least pleasant part of it. I had this really like weird image of a dying dog. Just like flashed into my head, like right towards the end of the experience, just like flashed into my head, this image of a dying dog. It was like, for a second it was there, and then I like forced it out, and that was, that made me sad right at the end of my. One thing I will say about the float tank experience is more of a physical thing. When I get out of there, I feel great.
Yes.
Because there's no
light
pressure
as a feather.
on you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I wish that I had one of, I wish I was like Rogan style and I had a float tank.
Your basement, yeah.
Like I said, with the meditation and stuff, you can't go in there once. I did one time for 1 hour, one time for 3 hours.
Yep.
I think we did it for 3 hours.
Yep.
And, I don't even remember what I was saying.
So, you know what that makes me think of? For anybody listening that has ever studied philosophy at all will be familiar with a thought experiment, and the thought experiment's called mind in a vat.
Okay, yeah.
So it's like, talking about how the world might be an illusion, and how much of it is an illusion is hard to say. Imagine if you were a mind in a vat, you were in the Matrix, and,
yes.
and everything's being sort of, fired into your brain, and you think it's real, but it's not real. That is kind of how I felt in the float tank.
Okay.
And just so, I assume most of the people listening here probably have some understanding of the float tank, but in case you don't, you're literally going into a big sort of capsule, a container. You close the door behind you, and it is completely dark. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And there is water in there with a bunch of salt, so you're floating in it. And it takes a little while to settle down. But once the water gets quiet and your fingers and toes stop touching the sides of the tank, you have no input whatsoever. Your brain starts doing things. It kind of feels almost like a panic. Your brain is firing things at you because it's so used to having stimulus all the time. When it doesn't, it doesn't know what to do. It's a really weird feeling, but it does take a long time in the float tank to get any sort of images.
That reminds me of what I was saying is that you have to, I wish I had one in my house because you have to do it. You can't just, you get in there and it takes you a while to get settled down in general, but it's something that, like, I'm sure if you do it often, you can kind of get in there and just get right into it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know how good you could get at it, but you could definitely get better at it. I feel like
absolutely. I'm pretty sure that you think about like meditators and stuff like that. They get good at it. Like they learn how to put themselves in a right state of mind. Like that's the whole point of it.
Have you ever gone in there high?
Every single time.
Okay. Because I did do it sober and I did do it affected. And when I was high, I was able to relax more quickly and to get into that feeling more quickly. But I do want to tell you what I saw. And I told you this before, but for the audience, it did take a long time to get these images, and they were very quick. They were flashes. One of them was the face of a raccoon.
Oh, okay.
It was right up in my face. So, again, you can't tell with your eyes open or closed whether they're open or closed because it's so dark in there, you can't exactly tell. So I'm sitting there looking into the abyss, the black abyss, and suddenly there's this raccoon's face, but angry, like a rabid raccoon, snarling, and it was right in my face, like inches away. So it was kind of startling, but of course I knew I was in a float tank and I was safe. But it was just a flash. And then a little while later, I saw my hands going into like a crack in a cave wall. Like I'm in this dark cave, and I can see my hands coming out, reaching into a crevice in the cave wall, and pulling out like a small treasure box.
That's cool.
And it was, but for a second, and it was gone.
Yeah.
That was it.
I don't really remember a lot that I saw, but I do remember that it was fleeting like that,
yes.
That just like, boom, a second. And I think that that's probably something that you get better too is staying in it, like you start feeling it and like as soon, I've heard lucid dreaming is like that too. Like people realize they're dreaming and then immediately wake up.
Do you think there's meaning to those images that we just talked about? Because they came from somewhere. Do you think that they're random, or do you think that there's actually some significance to them?
That is a good question.
Because when those things happen, Jung would say that the unconscious is sort of giving those images to you. So you're seeing them from the other side, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that is the truth. That tends to be the way that I see things, but I don't have a hard time understanding why people feel the other way. Kind of because I have felt that way myself, But I really don't know. I'm kind of like right there in the middle. I do kind of lean, like I said, lean towards them being meaningful.
Right.
But I mean, like the one guy, Hamilton Morris.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He doesn't think that he thinks it's all like chemicals in your head. There's nothing else.
Right.
And if he thinks it, then who am I to, say that that's a completely stupid idea?
So for those people who don't know Hamilton Morris, this is one of the TV shows. If you're interested in psychedelics or drugs in general,
what's it on? Because I tried to watch it and I couldn't find it.
I thought it was originally a Vice show, and I think I was watching it.
Think of that.
Yeah, I think it was a Vice show, and I think I was watching it on Hulu, but I can't really remember.
Okay.
But it's called Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia for those people who want to look it up. And that guy is, first of all, it's a very dry show. So prepare yourself for that. But Hamilton is an extremely smart guy with a real legitimate interest in drugs from a chemical perspective. So he definitely wants to show people what those experiences are like. Mm-hmm. He wants to talk about it. He wants to show you somebody high on that drug so you can see what it looks like.
Yeah.
And then he breaks down what the chemical structure is, what it's related to, like with the family of chemicals, and how you make it. So he actually goes through the process of synthesizing these drugs and talking about it. So if you want to get that kind of level of detail, that show is tremendous. I'd encourage you to check it out.
Very interesting. He's got a couple of good podcasts with Rogan too. So that's always a good resource. I
couldn't remember that. He was,
really?
He was on Rogan?
Yeah, okay. Twice. For the first time, it was super awkward.
Okay.
It was pretty entertaining for that reason alone. But, yeah, I mean...
So So I don't know where you might want to go next, and I'm open to your thoughts. But what I thought we'd do is maybe talk about marijuana first. And the reason is
the gateway drug.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Because it is a gateway drug, and I don't mean that in a gloom and doom sort of way, but it was for me. It was for you.
Yeah, man. It definitely opened. Marijuana was kind of that drug that made me realize, and I hate to, I'm going to be the guy who makes everything political, but marijuana was the drug that made me realize that just because people were telling me that it was bad doesn't mean that it actually is. Because once I started doing it, I was like, oh, there's nothing really that big to worry about here, you know? So then I started, that kind of dissolves the fear a little bit. You know? And I think that that's something we should talk about, is the fear that comes along with these substances.
Oh yeah. I'm going to make a note of that. We should definitely talk about that, because there is very much a fear component to it. Maybe not the first time you do it, but maybe so. I mean, you hear stories about people in the 70s doing LSD.
Sure.
You're going to have some fear going into that.
Sure.
But there is, especially with DMT, which I maybe we can save towards the end. But I want to talk about DMT because it's
the granddaddy of them all.
The granddaddy of them all. It's the Rose Bowl of psychedelics.
Yep. Well, I mean, I really don't know.
Well, you know what? How about set and setting?
That's hugely important. That's a great thing to bring up.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard that, not really understanding what it meant. And that's another thing, like I said, I think that these substances should be used responsibly. And I think part of that is the set and setting. When you're doing something that is going to give you this kind of potential experience, it's good to be in a good place. And that kind of goes both ways. Oh, yeah. But it goes in two ways. And that one of them is the set, and that's your mindset, like the way you're feeling,
absolutely,
how things are going, basically.
Absolutely.
And setting is, where are you? Do you feel safe? Do you have someone there that you can talk to if you need to?
Right.
All of that sort of thing.
So to that point, the way that these drugs were used traditionally, set and setting was very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's ritualistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you have a shaman who's done the experience many times, whose father and grandfather and great grandfather, going back forever and ever, had done the same. Yeah. It's ingrained in the culture and the society, and when they bring somebody in to that psychedelic experience, they know what they're dealing with. They're going to guide them through the process and all the things they're doing to help it along a certain goal. And sometimes that's music that they're playing, or chanting, or humming, or the images that are around them, the place where they choose to do that trip, in the forest or the desert or something like that. Yeah. At night or during the day. It all makes a difference. Having a fire there. Yeah.
I think, what do you think the purpose of all of that is?
Well, I mean, that's right to the point. That's right to the heart of it. I think that the purpose of all of that is to help people reach a state that's possible to reach in a psychedelic drug experience, but it's not guaranteed. And that state is, I used the word cosmic consciousness once before. It's that. It's the being one with the universe. It's what's called the mystical experience. Okay. And it's, again, you can do psychedelics and have a fun time or have a bad time or see magical things and not necessarily reach that climax. But if you get to that, you get a shaman, and the set and setting is going to help with that. It's the guided tour. It's the express route to that goal. And even that, it's no guarantee you're going to have that crazy, one with the universe type of experience.
Yeah. I mean, I want to talk more about that experience, what that means, what the implications are.
Well, before we do that, before we leave the set and setting, you said something earlier about when we were talking about dancing and at a concert venue, let's say, and you're talking about teenagers doing recreational drugs. So I just want to contrast this whole shaman business with this other side of the coin. So you've been there, people who've been there. You put, a teenager, somebody in their early 20s in a situation like that. They don't have a lot of life experience. They don't have a lot of context. They're just looking to have a good time. They want it to be a recreational thing. They do a crazy psychedelic drug. Maybe they see things, maybe they have strong emotions, maybe they have a bad trip, whatever it is, but they don't, to them, it has no meaning. It's like a random thing that happened. It was a crazy effect of the drug, but it doesn't have any context. It doesn't have any meaning. It'll create fear for the next time they want to do it, but it's not something that has any kind of lasting psychological impact because it's missing the set and setting. That going into it, the user didn't have an expectation of what that was going to be, and they didn't have anybody helping them.
Yeah. The word that always comes to my mind when I think about doing psychedelic drugs is intentionality.
Yes.
And one of the things about these things is whatever your intentions are may not be what you get out of it. You know, it might be completely different.
Absolutely.
But it's good to go into it with an intention.
Yes.
I think.
Does that feel to you when that happens? Does it feel to you like the drug had a different end in mind? Like you do the drug and you think to yourself, I want to focus on this thing. And that doesn't happen at all. Something else happens. Does it seem to you like there's an intentionality to the drug, or do you think it's like what you really needed? You didn't you thought you needed something else, but what you really needed was this other thing?
Well, I think that there is some kind of it's undeniable that you get, like I was saying, you get sometimes different things than you were asking for. It's hard to say whether that is because, it's almost like a breakdown between a mystical kind of thing and, saying that the drug wanted you to or the experience wanted you to. That's kind of like magical.
It is.
And I'm okay with that. I really don't have a problem with that. But I think another way that people might explain it is this, what I say I want out of the experience out loud is my conscious talking. When you get into that realm, you're not dealing with your conscious anymore. You're dealing with the stuff that's below that.
Yes. No, I could not agree with you more.
Yeah.
I think you're right. When somebody says something hippy-dippy like that the drug had a different thing in mind, it's not really the drug. It's the unconscious part of you that had that intention. And the unconscious is way more powerful than your conscious state. Yeah. It's going to creep in whenever it has an opportunity, and doing a psychedelic opens the gates to that.
Sure.
So your unconscious, it will exert itself.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, we started talking about marijuana for a minute. So earlier you were talking about breath work, and I've done a little bit of that Wim Hof hyperventilation kind of on purpose.
Yeah.
And what that feels like to me is, like anybody, who gets lightheaded, you kind of have this lightness, you have a little bit of a dizziness, you have even though you're still, and it's kind of pleasant in a weird way. That qualifies as an altered state of consciousness because it's not something that you would generally experience in an ordinary state.
Yeah.
The marijuana experience can be a very different experience depending on what strain you smoke, what type it is, whether you eat it, whether it's a concentrate. There's all sorts of differences there.
I always hear people say that it seems more psychedelic when you eat it.
Yes.
But, I have issues with eting it. I've got to eat like a horse's amount.
A metric ton. Yeah, you're right. So when I started smoking marijuana, I was in a point in my life where I was sort of desperate enough to try it. And guys, I'm not saying I didn't try it when I was a kid. Of course, I had opportunities. I tried it here and there, but I never really got high. But when I was in my mid 20s or so, I was at a point in my life where I was sort of at a low point, and I was desperate enough to try something that I was unwilling to do before. And again, this is not an endorsement at all, but kind of is. It was medicine for me.
Sure.
At that time, it made the world magical to me again for the first time since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And you know what I mean? It's like, and if you have kids and you watch them and you just smile at the fascination they have with mundane things, that's what I'm talking about. You put yourself back in a state where you remember how magical being alive is and how magical the cosmos is all around you. And it helped me tremendously in a time when I needed it.
Yeah. I did not resist the marijuana as long as you did. I was smoking it much earlier. Mm-hmm. So I don't have the same kind of thing. Honestly, there's this thing that people do with marijuana where they act like there's no negative consequences to it.
Right.
And that drives me nuts because there clearly, obviously are.
Right.
So that's just something to keep in mind, and not just with marijuana, but with all of these things. I mean, I think, as we were talking about before, they seem like they're almost anti-addictive to me, at least the real psychedelics.
Yes.
Marijuana, I do think, has like an addictive quality.
Oh, it
to
does.
It.
You know what?
So,
That's fair, and I think we should say that. You're right. People, especially nowadays, talk about marijuana and all the medical benefits and try to talk down the consequences. But I agree with you that with a certain type of habit, marijuana does become habit forming, and if you cold turkey go off of it after being really accustomed to having it every day, let's say, you will have trouble falling asleep.
Yep.
You will have headaches. I'm not talking about like opiate withdrawal. I'm not talking about terrible pain, but it is absolutely something that takes a week or so to recover from.
I don't notice a whole lot of that as far as the headaches and stuff like that. Maybe a little hard to fall asleep. And it's funny, this kind of ties into what we've been talking about with dreams and whatnot. I do get very vivid dreams, you know? If I've been smoking regularly and then I stop, like within 5 days of stopping, I start having these crazy dreams.
Interesting. Now, do you remember those more than regular dreams?
I mean, I remember them because they're vivid, like right when I wake up, but then, you know, like halfway through the day, they're completely gone, unless I document them, which I don't do. I should.
When you say vivid, are you talking about like colorful? By any chance?
No, I'm just talking about like crazy circumstances in the dreams. Like crazy stuff is happening, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So that kind of thing.
So I want to mention one thing because it just popped in my head. So I gave blood once.
Yeah.
Only once.
I remember this story.
Yeah, the reason is, Kyle, this is not going to be a surprise to you, but the reason is I blacked out. So I hadn't eaten all day, and I guess you're not supposed to do that. And I got convinced by a buddy I worked with to go ahead and do it, and I felt charitable. So I'm going to go do it. And the doctor, or I should say nurse, said to me, if you start feeling your vision narrow, if you start feeling anything like that, let me know. And she puts the needle in, and the blood starts coming out. And I immediately started feeling that way. And I thought to myself, don't be a pussy, Chris. You're fine. Take a deep breath. Next thing I know, I'm being woke up. And what they did was they laid the table flat. And apparently I jerked up towards the lady that was taking my blood, like almost like I was swinging at her.
Oh, okay.
And but this is the why I tell you the story, because when I came out of it, first of all, I heard the voices of people talking to me. And just like you know, you would imagine, Chris,
yeah.
And I heard it before I saw it, anything. My vision hadn't come back yet, but I could hear it, and it started helped me kind of pull myself out of it. But when I did, this is what I felt. I don't remember anything. I remember that wherever I was brilliantly colorful, like bright and colorful in a way that that doesn't exist in the real world. But this is the weird part. I felt when I was coming out of it, like I was somewhere I was familiar, and I was very comfortable, and I wanted to be there. And when I was coming out of it, it felt like I was being ripped out of that place against my will. And when I came to, it was this weird feeling of like, I wherever I was, I knew the place, I was comfortable there, I wanted to be there, and I felt like I was ripped from it back to reality. And it was so strange and weird that I never gave blood again. Don't have any intention of it.
To this day. Yep. Yeah, that's crazy. You know, do you remember feeling embarrassed when you came back?
Oh boy. Maybe a little. Yeah. Maybe a little. I was probably sheepish and didn't say much and just walked out of there when I was able to.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I was embarrassed, but it was very weird. Yeah. And it was very psychedelic. And I didn't know that at the time because I never did psychedelics then.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, it was very psychedelic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, that's like right in line with it seems like almost like the ecstatic ritual experience, you know?
Oh, yeah.
That type of a thing. But one of the things I wanted to get back to is when we were talking about the mystical experience kind of being the point of these, and what that is and the implications of it.
Mm-hmm.
Why are people chasing it? And why is it good? Why does it seem like it's good for people?
Well, the first thing I want to say about that is having an experience like that it's like being born again. And that obviously has religious overtones just saying those words. And that's kind of what I mean. I think this whole idea of eternal life, whether that's like a nirvana in a Buddhist sense or heaven in a Christian sense or whatever it is, that this goal of life, it's to conquer death, to be eternal. And I think that when you're reborn from the psychedelic experience, and that's, to me, what it feels like when you reach that pinnacle, you're not the same person again. You're not the same person you were before that experience. Yeah. It's like you've been resurrected like the phoenix from its ashes. That being reborn thing has dramatic psychological benefits. Yeah. It's like if you were a kid, let's just say during your awkward period, you were a kid and your family moves to a new school system and you get to like reinvent yourself. It's like you have an opportunity to be the best you. That's how I feel coming back from that. It's like this is a second chance. So something about that feels like dying, and that does sound bad, and it is scary, and it does feel scary. But if you accept it, if you go with it, the rewards are tremendously powerful.
Yeah. You talking about that, I've got a few quotes that I pulled out of The Doors of Perception here, and what you were talking about there just really made me think of this particular quote.
Let's hear it.
So it says, "The man who comes back through the door and the wall will never be quite the same as the man who went out. He will be wiser but less sure, happier but less self-satisfied, humbler in acknowledging his ignorance, yet better equipped to understand the relationship of words to things, of systematic reasoning to the unfathomable mystery which it tries forever vainly to comprehend." And I really do, I think that's kind of, obviously it's written by Aldous Huxley, so it's very fancy, but
right.
That is kind of it. It really does change. I mean, it changes you. You get an opportunity to change, and you can take it. I mean, it can really transform people.
Oh, absolutely. So, and I'm cutting right to the chase here, but I think that the experience, that mystical experience, what that really is a feeling of, it feels like remembering, which is a weird part of it. It's like a thing that happens that you're like, oh yeah, like I know that.
Yeah.
Even though you've never had that before, it feels familiar. I think what it is a moment where where your identity becomes more than your individual self, and it's extended to everything else. So it literally is it's becoming one with the universe situation. That's cliche. I hate saying it like that, but it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
It's an extension of your consciousness to include more than just yourself.
Yeah.
And it's such a powerful feeling. It makes you rethink everything you thought about what it means to be alive.
For sure. It definitely has made me... The experiences that I've had have definitely made me rethink how I feel about pretty much everything. So I just think that these experiences, when I say that they can transform people, I mean there's legitimate scientific studies where people who have never done psychedelics have like an LSD experience.
Right.
Okay. And then 30 years later, having never done a psychedelic again, those people will talk about how that experience was one of the most significant experiences of their lives.
Of their entire lives.
On the level of having a child or losing a parent.
Yes.
So there's something going on there. It's it doesn't seem like just chemicals to me, like Hamilton Morris, the materialist.
Right.
But again, I don't know. Maybe it is. But it seems like there is meaning. It seems like there's something important,
Well, I agree. And we can talk about like Jung again, talking about interpreting dreams.
Yeah.
Somebody has a dream, or maybe several dreams with a certain theme, and somebody like Jung can tease out real meaning that's applicable to that person's situation, their psychological health, let's say.
Yeah.
I do think that's true. And if you've ever had a dream like that, like a recurring dream or something like that, even if you never understood it or made sense of it, you had that feeling, that intuition that there's something important that you're missing.
Yeah.
Like, why else am I still having that dream? Because I'm not getting what I'm supposed to be getting out of it. There's definitely something like that going on.
Yeah. You know, I think just getting back to the actual experiences and things that I've taken from them, one thing that really stands out to me, and this is something that I'm about to read another quote, another Huxley quote here, because he hit a lot of stuff. Like, it's like I could have written it, but I mean, I wouldn't have done it so well.
Wouldn't have said it that way.
Exactly. I would have been way less eloquent.
Right.
But this one kind of nails it on the head for me. What, I got to find it first. I thought I had it as the wrong quote. But I don't even really need the quote. It's basically just the idea that human consciousness, like what you have when you're not under the influence of that substance, it acts as a limiting factor,
right,
not a productive factor.
Right.
Like, there is so much more going on around you. You know, like there's Wi-Fi floating around right now. I know that for a fact,
right,
because you paid for it, and I know it's here. But what else is floating around? You know, what other things that are not, you know, being paid for?
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I absolutely think that whatever our individual consciousness is, it is a limiting factor. It's something that takes the majesty, the tremendous majesty of whatever God is, and it filters it into a way that's I don't even know. This is where we start getting hippy dippy, and I'm not exactly sure what words to use here.
Yeah. I don't know what words you're looking for, but one thing that I think is, and this is something that Huxley says too, he says that a person has the capability to know everything that has ever happened and to remember everything that's ever happened to him. And I do think that I have distinctly gotten that kind of impression in these experiences, that this is all one big thing. Like, I am a part of one thing.
Yes.
Like, that I'm not separate from anything, and that everything that happens is happening to me, and everything that I do, I'm doing to everything. You know, it's all tied together.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
So
I have quotes too that I pulled out.
Okay.
And specific to people who describe this type of experience. So I don't want to stop your momentum.
No, I don't. You're good.
But there is a guy. His name is Richard Maurice Buck, and he wrote a book in 1901 called Cosmic Consciousness. And basically what it is a compilation of a bunch of people historically that have talked about having this mystical psychedelic experience from all different sources. But he just compiled them all so we could see that this is a phenomenon that exists, that's prevalent, that goes all through time, and that the people, and I'll give you a list here. I wrote down some of the names. So he's got Buddha and Jesus and some like religious figures in there, but he's in Paul and Muhammad. But he's also got poets like Dante, like Walt Whitman, like Tennyson and Henry David Thoreau. So these people all had quotes in this book that describe this type of mystical experience. Other people too, Socrates, philosophers like Spinoza and Francis Bacon, the artist William Blake, the mystic Swedenborg. So a whole bunch of people. And I first of all, I wanted to read the author's definition of cosmic consciousness, because this is another word for what you and I are talking about. And this is the way he puts it. He says, the soul that knows that God is in it is blessed. But the soul in which God wakes is that which is supremely blessed. This waking of God in the soul is what is called cosmic consciousness. So I'm going to say that again. He said somebody who knows that God is somehow in them. That's somebody who knows a thing or two. But somebody who opens up their eyes and realizes that God is looking out through them.
Sure.
That is a person who knows what the fuck is up.
Yeah.
And that, to me, I completely agree with. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree with you. We'll trade off quotes here, and mine's a little bit longer, but it kind of hits, I think, it kind of touches on what that is, and it's when Huxley said, and this is one of my favorite from the book, "We live together, we act on and react to one another, but always and in all circumstances we are by ourselves. The martyrs go hand in hand to the arena, they are crucified alone. Embraced, the lovers desperately try to fuse their insulated ecstasies into a single self-transcendence, in vain. By its very nature, every embodied spirit is doomed to suffer and enjoy in solitude. Sensations, feelings, insights, fancies, all these are private, and except through the symbols and at second hand, incommunicable. We can pool information about experiences, but never the experiences themselves. From family to nation, every human group is a society of island universes."
Yes.
And I think that that's one of the benefits of these psychedelics is it's easy to not realize that, like we've been talking about, that this is all one thing. We're all a part of one thing because of this island universe situation. And psychedelics can kind of remind you that this is all, a big soup of existence.
So that image that comes to my mind when you say, we're all kind of island universes, that is, for me, so the idea is like God is everything, for lack of a better word. God is everything, or the potential for anything to be. That's what God is. And every individual consciousness, every person, let's say, is that completely. So the idea is you have this island of, this ocean of sort of islands of consciousness, and each one of those individual islands is the fullness of being. It's God. So each and every person contains the infinity of God in them, and we're all disconnected from each other, but we're all the same thing. And that is hard to understand. It's hard to conceptualize. But I completely agree with that and believe that that's part of what the psychedelic experience tells you. I don't know. It's interesting.
That is interesting.
So while we're talking quotes here, there's two, again, I think it's very much tied to religious feelings. By the way, this is something that Joe Rogan talked about several times. I think it's worth mentioning here, that there was a book written called "The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross."
Yeah, very interesting.
Which makes a connection between psychedelic experiences, in this case specifically mushrooms, magic mushrooms, and the Christian religion,
specifically the Amanita muscaria.
Right.
Yeah. So,
and then we remember him talking about even the acacia, the burning bush, maybe being an acacia tree and having similar psychedelic properties for Moses.
And it's undoubted that there is a tie over between, the Venn diagram of psychedelics and Christianity. There's definite crossover there.
Oh, yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's do this. I have a Buddha quote and I have a Jesus quote. I'm gonna read them. So this is a passage that's by tradition supposed to be the words of the Buddha. So here it goes. "Victorious over discontent and lust, over spiritual danger and dismay, will bestow upon him the ecstasy of contemplation, will enable him to reach with his body those stages of deliverance which are incorporeal and pass beyond phenomena, cause him to become an inheritor of the highest heavens, make him being one to become multiple, being multiple to become one, enable him to comprehend by his own heart the hearts of other beings and of other men, to understand all minds." This is Buddha talking about nirvana, talking about the pinnacle of the religious exercise. So, Buddha was supposed to have reached that state where he was no longer bound by the material world and was basically living, in heaven, let's say, for lack of a better analogy. This is his description of it. And he says, enable him to comprehend by his own heart the hearts of other beings, to understand all minds. And that is very much what that being one with the universe type of experience, that mystical experience, feels like. It feels exactly like what the Buddha says he felt when he reached nirvana, which started the religion of Buddhism.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the story of Jesus, I don't know if unfortunately is even the appropriate word here, but the story of Jesus has a very similar story, and it goes like this. and this is the passage right from the Bible, and straightway coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens rent asunder, and the Spirit as a dove descending upon him. And a voice came out of heaven, saying, Thou art my beloved Son, in thee I am well pleased. And straightway the Spirit driveth him forth into the wilderness. Okay, so in this passage, Jesus sees the heavens open up. Anybody who's done DMT knows what that feels like. The heavens open up, and the Spirit as a dove descending upon him. So you've got this, I don't know if you want to call it hallucination, but you have a visual component. The heavens open up. This bird that represents something comes down to him, and says, "Thou art my beloved Son, in thee I am well pleased." Being the Son of God, like we talk about Jesus being, to me, I think what that does is it gives you kind of a contemplative way of thinking about, a human being, Jesus, as intimately related to the Creator, being the Son of God. Mm-hmm. And that I think that the Christian message is really supposed to be showing us this image of man being God. Mm-hmm. And the more we can, contemplate that, the more we will realize that if man can be God in Jesus, why can't it be that way for me? And I think it is that way for all of us.
That's blasphemy. I'm sorry.
I'll let a mic drop. What other quotes did you have, Kyle?
Nothing. That's about it. I mean, as far as the quotes go for me. But I think that what you said there is definitely true. I don't know. One of the only other things that I wanted to talk about is, at least that I have notes for anyways, is, the stigma that these things have, especially the psychedelic drugs, the substances, meditation and yoga, they have a pretty acceptable stigma at this point.
Right. But
LSD, on the other hand, it may be not as feared as it once was, but right. It's definitely still got, a reputation.
Oh,
drugs in general, illegal things. And, more than just like the opinion of people, I kind of wanted to talk about why these things might be outlawed, why these things might be banned.
Yes. So before we jump into that side of the coin, sure. I have a couple other quotes that I want to talk about.
Sure, okay.
So I had Huxley quotes too, but they weren't the same ones you picked out.
Okay.
And I also have a couple of Jung quotes, and I feel like they kind of go together.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to talk about is Huxley in The Doors of Perception. He's talking about tripping on mescaline. And I believe mescaline comes from peyote. Is that right?
Yep.
From peyote. But I think MDMA, so folks might be familiar with that as ecstasy, that drug was also synthesized from mescaline. So if anybody's done that or mescaline, you know what this is sort of like. But this is what he said. He said, "I was seeing what Adam had seen on the morning of his creation, the miracle, moment by moment, of naked existence." So this is what Huxley said, which I think is tremendous. But listen to this. Jung said this. He's talking about the experience of the unconscious. And again, Jung, his approach to that was very different from Huxley's. But he says, "Consciousness becomes all-embracing, but nebulous. An infinite number of things merge into an indefinite whole, a state in which subject and object are almost completely identical." That was the wrong quote, but that was one I wanted to talk about. So this is subject and object becoming identical. Is this very strange part of the kind of becoming one with the universe type of mystical experience?
Yeah.
Where the thing that you are and the thing that you experience, they don't seem like different things anymore. They seem like the same thing. Mm-hmm. And something about that resonates as so true, and it does feel like remembering. It feels like something you always knew, and it's so obvious that you kind of forgotten. And when suddenly it's brought in your face again, you're like, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not different from any of this.
Yeah.
Sorry, the quote I meant to read was about creation, and Jung says, "Creation begins with the act of division of the opposites that are united in the deity. From From their splitting arises a gigantic explosion of energy, the multiplicity of the world, which I love. I love. You know, he's talking about God being something that encompasses all possible things.
Yeah.
So God's not good. He's good and evil. You know, he's not day, he's day and night. You know, he's not being, he's being and non-being, whatever that means. And that when those things are separated, and they have to be separated to be known. It's like, if God is all things, there's nothing to compare God to. There's nothing outside of God. So there's really nothing, that can be experienced. So you have to separate those things from God. And that's what he calls the division of the opposites. And then he says that what that does is it creates an explosion of energy. And I just can't help but picture the Big Bang.
Yeah.
So whatever this psychological, thing that he's talking about here, the division of opposites in God, that when that happens, there's an explosion of energy, and the result is the multiplicity of the world.
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful.
That is beautiful. Leave it to Carl Jung.
The other one that goes with the quote I mistakenly read first is Huxley, who said this. He was talking about the mescaline experience, and he says, it's like breathing, but with no recurrent ebbs, only a repeated flow from beauty to heightened beauty, from deeper to ever deeper meaning. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. That's definitely interesting. I think that's I don't have it written down here, but I think that's kind of the same one where, I'm sorry, excuse me, where he kind of talks about feeling like you're going to disintegrate, like you're just faced with raw meaning, and I think that kind of, I think that there's something about when you hear people talk about bad trips, there is something where they tend to talk like that. Like they're afraid. I was afraid that I was just going to disintegrate, that I'd be gone.
Yes.
I think that's interesting. It's, you hear about the ego death a lot of the time with it.
Do you remember how we were talking earlier about the mystical experience being like a death and rebirth? Uh-huh. That's what I think it is. You get to a point where your ego, the thing, that part of you that you kind of identify with, that you believe to be the thing that you are, it's only a part of you. It's only maybe a small part of you. And it clings on for dear life. And when you have that drug experience and it kind of gets diminished, there comes a point where it goes away. And that is the it's the psychedelic orgasm, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
That's the thing that's so dramatically beautiful and compelling and satisfying, like nothing you've ever experienced before. And it's necessary to die to yourself, to be reborn to that. And I think that's what that is. It absolutely seems like you're voluntarily giving up your life in that moment, because anybody who's done psychedelics will know this, that you can resist it. You can try. When you do that, in my experience, it's not good. When you try to control it or try to intellectualize it, like I often try to do, it will punch you in the face and give you a bad time.
Yep.
But as soon as you let go and go with it, it's like strangely like you suddenly are in control of it. It's like suddenly you're driving the car again. It's very, very strange.
Yeah, I don't know that I would agree that it feels like you're in the car again, but it just feels like the car is not about to fly off of a cliff anymore.
Okay, fair enough.
Because I don't, especially with DMT, I don't feel like I'm in control at all. Even when it's good, I am not in control of it.
So, well, I agree with you. But when how about this? Rather than jumping right to DMT, we started with marijuana. Let's talk about mushrooms for a second.
Climb the psychedelic ladder.
Let's climb the psychedelic ladder. We're going to talk about psilocybin mushrooms.
Okay.
I've never done Amanita. I've never done that.
No, me neither. I've heard that it's not even that good.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've heard that it's a hard one to really have a good experience on. And to have a good experience, you have to eat it and then drink your own pee.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that. I heard that about cedar sage.
Sorry, I keep coughing.
What's cedar sage? What's that called again?
Cedar sage?
Seer sage.
Oh, Salvia divinorum.
Salvia divinorum. That's one that I heard people pretty much like clockwork have bad experiences with.
Yeah, I still want to do it. I wish that I would have tried it back when it was legal in Ohio, easy to get. You just go to like a bong shop, a head shop.
So listen, I know you wanted to talk about some of the social stuff, but I do want to talk about the actual drug experiences because we're an hour in and we haven't really done much of that.
Yeah.
So tell me about your first mushroom trip because I wasn't there.
So that was when I lived in the apartment down in Columbus.
Right.
And that's another one. It's hard to remember. The one thing that I do remember about it, and this is something that I feel like I could use some work on anymore. It's like you learn these lessons sometimes from psychedelics, but you're not just like automatically locked into them. It takes effort. You have to put it into practice.
Yes.
And I did a good job of this for a while, but I'm slacking. And that was, I was sitting in my car. Okay, it was when I had my Chevy Cobalt. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in the car in the parking lot, which sounds dangerous, tripping on mushrooms sitting in your car. But I wasn't going anywhere. I knew I wasn't going anywhere. And it was a hot summer day, okay? So I'm inside my car, the windows are up, and I'm sweating. And I'm honestly enjoying it. I feel like I'm in a sweat lodge or something like that.
Yes.
And I've got my phone, and I keep getting text messages from people. And I'm like stressing about the text messages, like I got to respond. But, one of the things about psychedelics, and Huxley talks about this in the book, is that like people who are tripping can't be bothered,
Right.
So I was getting these text messages and I had this internal sense if I need to respond to these, it's important that I get back to these people. But then the mushrooms are like, you're going to be fascinated by your door handle for about 15 minutes now,
Right.
Yep. So I do remember being like right on the verge of not having a good time.
Yes.
Because I was like wrestling, with, I should have just like,
So
be fascinated by the door handle.
Yes. Well, that goes back to the set and setting thing. Mm-hmm. That you're 100% right. If you have any kind of like responsibility while you're tripping, that is a recipe for disaster.
Pretty much every time I trip, I have this terrifying, just a fear that somebody's going to come over. That I'm going to be, in the throes of ecstasy, and so I'm going to get visitors.
Oh, that's happened to me.
I'll be an alien. Yeah, that sucks. That's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. You're right. So you're sweating in the car.
That's about it. That's really, I mean,
What
I remember.
What was good about it, Kyle? Was there something good about it that time?
Well, yeah, there was good. It was just fun, like that was a time where I did get something out of it, and my relationship with my phone changed after that. It really did.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, it seemed more like back then, I was in a very different place back then. I was not, I would say, as just like hippie and stupid as this sounds, I was not as spiritually open back then as I am now.
I know what you mean. Yep.
And I knew I had listened to Rogan, and I knew that there was maybe some kind of juice to these things, like there was some kind of benefit that could be had. But I didn't really understand, and I didn't get that much out of it, Although the phone thing, that's pretty big. That's a good realization.
It is big. So I'll tell you where I think this comes from you, and just knowing you for my whole life. So, so obviously you were brought up, like in the church. Yeah. And what I mean is like that, you were there every Sunday, but you were also there every Wednesday, and you were also hanging out, afterwards, with the kids there, and that was your social scene and all that, and that was like imposed on you. It wasn't exactly your choice. It was like, this is what your family's doing, and you had no choice.
I did love it though when I was, especially when I was like youth group age. Yeah. So, but I know what you mean.
But it seems to me
it's like something you're born into. Like
yes. But I think you resented that.
Maybe for a while. Yeah. During that point in time when I was on that mushroom trip, that was like the height of me hating organized religion. Being very much like a malicious atheist,
right.
Like a Sam Harris type atheist.
Right.
Although Sam Harris isn't that angry of a guy, but just like a straight materialist, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So I didn't know what I thought the benefit from mushrooms was going to be.
Yeah, it was your first psychedelic, right?
Yeah. First
So what
ever.
what a surprise that was.
Yeah.
How about your most intense mushroom trip? What was unique about that?
One thing that happened, and this was another time that I did it when I lived down in Columbus. I was tripping, and I was just sitting on the couch. It was about 3 grams that I took.
Okay.
And I was laying on the couch, and we had that sliding glass door that went back to like the golf course area.
I remember. Yep.
Not a nice area. A lot of times people say they live on the golf course, and it's really fancy.
This was not a nice golf course.
No. But there was like a patch of trees right back there, and it was a warm spring night or summer night, and I had the door slit open. I was just laying there in the dark, and the bugs, or just whatever, the crickets that make those like squeaking
or cicadas
noises
or something.
in the night, they would all build to this like giant crescendo, and then all of them would stop at the same time.
Wow.
And to this day, I don't know what that's about. If that's like a thing that happens in nature, and I just don't know about it. I assume that it has to be, but
and that like eerie pause, that eerie silence. What was that like when you were tripping?
It seemed significant. I don't know. Another thing that I remember about that trip, I was working in a kitchen, and there was this dude that worked there that I thought that, I would used to joke around with, and I was like, I should be friends with this guy. Like, I need more friends. I didn't though. Like, I didn't. But that was like a message that it was sending me.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I agree. I think that psychedelics, they do kind of like you get the feeling that you're getting messages sometimes, and it seems like those are coming from yourself. But it's like something that you won't admit to, or that you're trying to hide from, or you're trying to avoid.
Sure.
But when you're doing psychedelics, it's like, no, you got to confront this. This is something that's important.
Yeah, I really think that, and I think maybe later will be a better time to get to this. But I think that when there's something important and you're being faced with it, resisting that is what causes the bad trips.
Yes,
but
100%.
But like I said, I think we'll talk about like bad trips, and I kind of want to talk about that with the social aspect of it, because that's like one of the biggest things when people think about psychedelics. Oh, bad trip.
Okay.
But but because you talked about that something seems important and it's something that you need to tackle.
Yep.
And if you back out of that, that's when it starts to get weird. That's when it starts to get not fun. Yeah,
it's one of those things where this is like what we were talking about earlier, where there's some meaning there, and it's not obvious right away what that is. At least that's been that way with me. It sounds like with you too.
Yeah.
It takes some thinking about afterwards. So sometimes days or weeks before you can like really admit what the meaning was.
Yeah, I think that's for sure true. And I think it's like I don't know. This is kind of because this is kind of going back to we'll talk about this later.
Okay, so let me tell you about my mushroom experience, what I remember from it, and I think this is probably equally true for LSD as mushrooms, and maybe because I can't really remember which is which in hindsight, so I'm going to kind of put these together. But I remember feeling, first of all, this is a trip that lasts 4+ hours. So it's not an easy thing to do. It is kind of an ordeal, actually. But I remember feeling scared in the beginning when it started to come on, because it was new to me and I didn't know what to expect. But I remember feeling, first of all, visual acuity. So the first thing I noticed is everything looks sharp. It's like somebody just put glasses on me or something. Colors look bright, shadows look really compelling. Everything looks sharp and like super HD. Like I'm looking through my eyes, and everything looks like it's in super HD.
I know exactly what you mean.
And one of the things that does is it makes things interesting. It's like things catch your attention. And I remember playing with my daughter, and it was like the most. And again, and under normal circumstances, that's a beautiful experience.
Sure.
In this instance, it was the most beautiful thing I can possibly imagine. It was like looking at something that, like my child, is something that is more potential than actual.
Yeah.
And I'm more actual than potential, and it's like this weird thing where I'm looking at her like she's continuing me. Yep. And she gets everything about it is like dramatically captivating. And I remember walking down the sidewalk, and my daughter's walking ahead of me, and I'm following behind her. I'm looking at her little footsteps and seeing the shadows fall behind her, and the cracks in the sidewalk, and the little pieces of grass coming up through the cracks, and the little ant walking across the sidewalk, and every part of that is like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, the most compelling theater I can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing. And I never really had a bad trip, although I do have something we can talk about when we get there. But that's the type of thing I noticed with the mushrooms and the LSD. And I never did get any kind of crazy visuals from the LSD.
See, that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand, because a lot of people's understanding of tripping comes from like movies and stuff like that.
Yep.
And it's like crazy colors and crazy visuals.
Right.
But this is kind of something that Huxley touched on in that book, is that a lot of it has nothing to do with visuals. It has to do with the way that you perceive things, you know?
Yep.
And just the way that you feel. I remember him talking about time, you know?
Yep.
How there's really no concept of it. You know, things like that. It definitely makes you, what's the word I'm looking for? It makes you appreciate being in the moment, you know? You're not worried about, you know, most of the time, and this is part of that ego death thing. Like a lot of time you're thinking, all right, I got to go to the grocery store, got to be to work on time, the bills are due, you know, all of this stuff.
Yep.
The psychedelics kind of melt all that away, and you're just a consciousness in a moment experiencing whatever it is that you're experiencing. And that makes things take on all kinds of importance, and just you appreciate things more.
So Jordan Peterson would say that it reminds you, it's something that is connected to the feeling that we have, that our lives have some kind of cosmic significance.
Yeah.
That's what that is. It's really interesting, man.
Yeah.
So I do want to talk about bad trips. I don't know if we want to jump directly to DMT, but do you have more on this?
I got some LSD experiences.
Okay, let's hear it.
And one of, I mean, I've taken LSD probably, I think, more than any other of the psychedelics.
Yep.
And I remember one time I took it and things just seemed, I was noticing visual patterns a lot. It was during Christmas. I was over at my mom's house, and she had these like long, I don't know, it's like streamers is kind of what I want to call them, like on her curtains. And they were like looped like double loops, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just started noticing that pattern everywhere. That's one of the things that I remember from that one.
Yep.
You know, nothing crazy. Then another time, this was a crazy time. I took acid and I went to see, it's a stupid movie. I don't think it's good at all. But when I was on acid, it was the second of the most recent Star Wars trilogy.
Okay.
The one where, you know, spoiler alert, if you care about these movies that are not even really that good, it's the one where Kylo Ren kills Han Solo.
I remember.
And I enjoyed the hell out of that, because I was, you know, I wasn't like in the height of it, but I was still very much tripping. And it's funny because we talked about Carl Jung, and when I was watching that movie, I was seeing it as like, I was watching archetypes. Like I was seeing themes and stuff like that way more than I normally did.
Yes.
And just like, you know, we were talking about before, like the colors and just like, you know, those movies are...
You remember you brought up Joseph Campbell last time?
Yeah.
Do you know that he was brought in for this original Star Wars movies?
Oh, really?
He was brought in to help with the storyline for exactly that reason.
I wonder if that's why those ones are good.
No, the originals. Yeah, that's what you're talking about. So all of the archetypal themes and the characters in Star Wars, you know, he had a big part in kind of helping design that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
JC.
Yeah.
What were we talking about before Joseph Campbell?
Well, one thing you said earlier that caught my attention was you were talking about emotions. Maybe that wasn't the word. Maybe it was feelings or something. But there is a part of the psychedelic experience that's not visual, and that's what gets the most.
Yeah.
People talk about that the most. There's another part that's emotional. It's about feelings, and it's a way. I don't know if you've felt this either. Like the most joy you've ever felt in your whole life, like you're bursting with it, or like something's funny and you just laugh for hours or whatever. It's like the emotions can get really intense and unusual, and I feel like that's super important. I think there's something about the emotional content of the images that you're seeing that is where the meaning is, something very important about that. And one of the things that reminded me of is Jung, there's a Jung quote where he says that emotion is the chief source of consciousness, that nothing happens without emotion, that nothing changes without emotion. So they're things that are tied intricately together, and I definitely feel that on psychedelics, especially DMT.
Yeah, that everything is tied together.
That the emotional feeling is the most important part of the experience. Like it's telling me something. It almost seems like the emotion is like a sixth sense. It's just like the emotion is like some other sense that I'm getting.
Okay.
So it's like you don't see or feel or taste or touch a psychedelic experience. It's like a dream, but you do feel it. You see it and you feel it, and there's an emotional quality to it. Does that resonate with you at all?
Oh, 100%. That's mostly what the experience is for me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've seen some very cool shit on psychedelics. I've had some great visuals, but even the visuals. So a lot of the experience, I think most of the experience is a feeling thing.
Yep.
And there are visuals, but even the visuals are tied to the feelings.
Yes.
You know, like there's I really don't even know how to describe that, especially when you start getting up into like DMT, like the things that you're seeing and the things that you're feeling. I have no idea how that they are tied together, but they seem to be to me.
Yep.
I don't know.
Do you want to talk DMT? Or are we getting ahead of ourselves?
No, I mean, I don't really know what else. I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of other things that we can talk about, but I think the DMT is a fine thing to talk about.
Yeah, because I do want to talk bad trips and the social stuff. But DMT to me is the pinnacle. We're climbing the psychedelic tree. We get to the top. That's dimethyltryptamine, in my opinion. Shout out to Joe Rogan once again. If it wasn't for him, I don't know that I ever would have known about it, or certainly wouldn't have sought it out. But that is the psychedelic that I've done more than any other. So, and I've had some really crazy experiences. But I remember the story of the first time you did it, and so I'll tell you my part of it for the audience. So I had it, and it's something that's not easy to get, obviously, and I had just an absolutely amazing experience, and I wanted my best bud to share in it. So I call Kyle over. He comes over to the house, and he gives it a go. And I remember I knew what to expect. I knew what you were getting yourself into, but you didn't.
I mean, I had some kind of an idea. At least I thought I had some kind of an idea, because I've heard people talk about this for a long time,
right?
And the type of stories that I've told since I've taken it, I've heard people tell those stories, and you think that you know, but you have no idea. Like that, like that MTV documentary show. That was the slogan. True Life. Yep. True Life DMT. You think you know, you have no idea.
You have no idea.
Because it is just the most powerful thing that I don't even know how to describe it.
Yep. So again, I told you guys that when I did LSD, I didn't have crazy visuals. So I don't know what that means. Maybe it means I didn't take enough. Maybe it means I had a weak dose. Maybe it means that's just my constitution and I'm not, likely to have those sorts of things. But when I did DMT, after having done LSD, that was a completely different experience. Mm-hmm. It was almost entirely visual. But when I watched you do it, you took, first of all, I took two giant drags of it.
Yeah.
And I was gone.
I was just doing what you told me.
I know. And I told you to do that. And you took monster drags, but way bigger than I would have thought.
Yeah.
And I just watched you do it. My eyebrows just got big. And I wasn't going to tell you. I wasn't going to say anything.
That would have been that would have been a nightmare.
Would have been a terrible idea.
Yeah.
But I remember you exhaled and your head fell back against the back of the couch. You closed your eyes and I was just like, here we go.
Yeah.
And after a couple seconds, you like very like struggling, you very difficultly opened your eyes and looked at me and said, "Can you leave?" So I got up and left the room.
Yeah.
And whatever happened to you during that experience, I only vaguely know, but I did hear you talking to yourself a few different times.
Yeah.
And I was standing at the top of the steps and I was just smiling and thinking to myself, this guy's having a conversation with God.
Yeah. I wish that I would have not been worried about you being there.
Yeah.
But I mean, honestly, okay, so I took those 3 giant hits, and because that's when people tell you how to blast off on DMT, that's what they tell you. Take 3 big hits, hold it in as long as you can. So that's what I did. And, you know, when I took that, I laid my head back, and what I saw, I closed my eyes, and I heard this sound that was like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like, yeah, something like that.
Yep.
But it was like rumbly, and it just sounded like the reverberations of the universe or something like that.
Yes.
And I closed my eyes, and what I saw, I was looking down. It was like I was in space, and I was looking down at this planet, and this planet was just made out of these weird, like, geometric shapes.
Yep.
And they were like shifting into each other, and I felt like, you know, like we were talking about before, I felt like I was going to disintegrate. I felt like I was going to get blown away.
Yep.
And I thought that I might die in real life, so I was like, I got to get Chris out of here. I don't want to die in front of Chris.
Oh God, that's what it was? I didn't know that.
It was something like that. Like, okay. I don't know that it was like, you know, I don't know what I thought, but I was just like, what if something bad, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
So then you left, and I remember closing my eyes again. And another thing, before I get to that, when I opened my eyes, you know, I was looking at that planet, and then I opened my eyes, and I was looking up at your ceiling, and I saw just like this like grid pattern over everything, like superimposed over my vision onto your ceiling and the walls and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then I looked at you and I asked you if you could leave. So you left, and I closed my eyes again, and I saw, it looked like this bright red, like scrolling writing being like instantly carved into this black onyx stone, and it was carving these like Egyptian like images, like, you know, dogs with heads, you know, wearing like pharaoh hats and stuff like that.
Yep.
And that's about all I remember of the visuals, because I was fighting it pretty hard. I was like, I gotta get out of here. So
yeah, so I agree. I had similar experiences as far as the colors and the geometric patterns. And to me, it kind of it made me think of like if you ever looked at a living cell underneath a microscope. It's like you can see all the different cells connected together, and you can see the organelles inside the cells. You see little shapes inside the cells. So just go back to 8th grade science. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
It's like that, but very colorful, and everything sort of moving, and it was fractal. It was like everything I was seeing inside of the cells, and this is what was like the hieroglyphic type stuff. It was the same thing I was seeing in the cells themselves, and I remember feeling like I was being pulled into a cyclone. Like it felt like I was moving, and that I wasn't moving. Like I was getting sucked into the image, so it kind of felt like I was flying and following the movement of this image that I was seeing, and I had no idea what I was looking at. I never experienced anything like that. It was nothing at all like anything, even in other psychedelics that I ever experienced. It was very, very strange, and every time I did it, it's been different. But the closest thing that I can reference anybody listening to, if you go online and you search for an Alex Gray painting called Net of Being, N-E-T, Net of Being. It is the closest thing that I can possibly point to that seems like what I was seeing in the DMT experience.
That's exactly the type of thing that I've seen too, 100%.
Yes.
And it's funny because I had seen, Alex Gray has been on Rogan. Rogan's a common theme throughout this podcast. And I had seen that net of being before I had done DMT, and then I had done DMT, and I looked it up, and I just saw it completely differently. I saw it, and I was like, I completely get it now.
So yeah, it's funny. So if I have that framed in my office.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And when I look at that, even today, I will feel like a little reverberation of that DMT feeling. I'll get like a little flash of it. It's just very subtle, but just looking at that picture, it's like a little bit of like a
jolt.
Yeah.
Like a callback. Yeah.
I do want to talk about my most intense DMT experience.
Okay.
Because I did blast off, all the way. I had one with the universe type of a feeling. And this one time in particular, I want to describe because it was so dramatically powerful. It was like looking at a starless sky, like a perfect black as far as you can see. Mm-hmm. And I knew there was something behind it. So it kind of seemed like a curtain. There was something behind the curtain. And it was like there was a bunch of holes poked in this black. And I could see light coming out of the holes. And I knew that the light was like pushing hard against this curtain, like so hard that I couldn't even imagine the power behind it. It was the most terrified I've ever been in my life. And remember, I couldn't see what was behind the curtain. I just saw little glimpses of the light coming out of these holes, and I knew that whatever that thing was going to wash me away. Easy.
Okay.
Easy peasy. And I days and weeks after that experience, I thought about that and thought about that and thought about that. And it all of a sudden made sense to me that whatever was behind the curtain was the force of creation. It was God. Whatever it is that I am, down deep, whatever it is that I really am, it was that thing. It was that monstrous roaring power behind that curtain that was just trying to tear out through these little holes, and it was being held back by just a like it would have taken just a baby's breath to just rip through and tear me apart.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying and beautiful, and it was like this crazy emotional feeling that I can't really describe in words.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
That sounds very intense. Having been in that place myself, I can, kind of imagine how that would feel. And I think that's kind of what I felt too when I was having mine and I had to ask you to leave. It just feels like it feels like you're going to disintegrate. But I feel like part of that is, earlier we were talking about how consciousness acts as a reducing valve.
Yep.
And I feel like what happens there while you're feeling, and this is all just hippie speculation, but I feel like what's happening there is you're getting a more of a flow on that reducing valve. You're getting a little insight into more, and it's overwhelming.
Oh yeah.
My most intense DMT trip was the
first one.
Yeah. And I've had good DMT experiences since then, but I feel like that was definitely the most intense one, and I might have been able to get more from that one, but I was so blown away that I was fighting it really hard.
Oh yeah.
And that kind of made it unpleasant in some ways.
Yep.
And I also, this goes back to set and setting. I was worried, you and your family were upstairs, and in my mind, I was worried that you guys were worried about me, and I felt like I needed to go up there and like let you know that I was okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that was in my head. That's just like these things get in there.
Yep. That goes back to set and setting, man.
And I remember I ran upstairs and was like still tripping pretty hard.
Your eyes were as big as saucers when you came upstairs.
But I was like, no, I'm fine, totally fine.
Yep. It's so disorienting, isn't it?
It is.
It takes like a while just to, be okay.
It's not like physically disorienting though. It's not like being drunk.
No.
Yeah. It's even It's weird to describe how it is disorienting, because it's not physically like you're drunk, but it's also not mentally like you're drunk. Like, one of the things that Huxley says in that book is that he says something to the effect, he had some recordings from when he was tripping, and he says, I can't tell that I was any stupider then than I am in normal times,
Right.
Yep. And that's true. You feel pretty clear of mind.
Yes, you do. You do.
But it's just like you're plugged into another dimension for a little bit.
Yep.
So,
and I think that what that is a glimpse at the part of yourself that you don't ordinarily get to glimpse. Mm-hmm. I think that's what Jung would call the unconscious.
Yeah.
It's what Buck would call cosmic consciousness. It's something that's a part of each and every one of us that whatever our brains in normal functioning, day-to-day reality keep us from seeing, that veil was lifted. And maybe it was just a peak, but it was something more to reality than we generally allow. And the impression it leaves on you is that it's very real.
Yeah.
Maybe more real than reality.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I land on it too, is that it is, I don't know if more real, but it is reality. Like,
it
that,
is
it's
reality.
Like the bigger picture of reality.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the other DMT experiences that I've had since then, they've been like, I've gotten good stuff out of them, mostly just to appreciate how beautiful things are and how fortunate I am.
Yep.
Things like that. Like, I remember one time I did it and I was listening to Sturgill Simpson, who I love. And after that, I just had like an even more of an appreciation for that guy's music. And he talks about that kind of stuff in his music. So that's part of it, I think. That's like why I was listening to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely an amazing substance. And it's like one of those ones where it's like, am I recommending that people do it? I mean, like I said in the beginning of this, kind of make up, you decide. If if it's interesting to you, then you should probably do it. But, I don't know.
So, did you touch on the bad trip stuff that you wanted to, or was there something else you wanted to talk about in that regard?
Well, the only thing that I kind of wanted to say, to lead into that, I just wanted to talk about how with the DMT, there's that element, and not just with DMT, but just with the psychedelics in general, there's that thing that I have, and I think a lot of people have, where they come to it with an element of fear.
Right.
And it's because I feel like the main draw for that fear is, for most people, it's the bad trip. It's kind of like been publicized. You hear a lot about the bad trip.
Right, yep.
And we've talked about how kind of what I think causes that bad trip is you avoiding the thing that the vision or whatever is trying to show you,
Yep.
So I think that that's something, and I kind of think that the same feeling of disappointment that you get when you like give up on a diet, or like that kind of like nagging, that it's like the same thing. It's like, it's like I should have done it, but I didn't.
Yep. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
when I do DMT, I like that more than any other substance. I have fear going into that experience for all the reasons we talked about already. I'll lay down to do it. My heart will start racing. My legs will start trembling, like I've got adrenaline coursing through my veins. It's very, very strange. And it is a little bit of a heroic act to put that to your lips and to take
do
it
yeah,
again.
It's like, I mean, it's like jumping out of an airplane.
It is.
It's crazier than jumping out of an airplane in some ways. But I mean, as far as the bad trip stuff goes, I just feel like I wanted to address that because I feel like that's one of the main hang-ups that people have. And I just think I'm still afraid of them, don't get me wrong. But it's just, if you are honest with yourself, you're going to get something from the bad trip. And the sooner you can embrace that, the sooner it's going to stop being a bad trip.
Yeah, and you know what it does do, or it can do, is it can actually reduce your fear of death in your normal life.
Yeah.
So I feel that way. I mean, I used to, as a younger man, that was like the deepest fear in the back of your mind that you never let yourself think about, that one day you're going to die.
Yeah.
And now I can think about that, and I don't feel the same way that I used to feel. And I remember having a trip one time where I felt like I was dying or I was going to die. And I started feeling that going south, like I was going to have a bad trip, maybe for the first time. And I caught myself. And this goes back to your point about feeling like you're not like drunk or out of it. You're sharp, mentally you're sharp. And so I noticed it, and I thought to myself, just experience what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And I just let myself feel my heart beat. Listen. I heard it. I felt it. I started to calm down, and as I started to calm down, the whole trip just changed. Just got better again.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. So there's a tip for you guys.
Yep. Just go with the flow. That's good advice for psychedelics. Go with the flow. Don't fight it, because you're not going to win.
Yep.
Once that chemical is in there and it's affecting your brain chemicals, you can't suck it out. It's not like snake venom.
Right.
You're on the ride. Buy the ticket, take the ride.
Yeah, take the ride. Enjoy it.
So just getting to like the one last thing that I wanted to talk about is, there are substances, and there's a move to legalize these sort of things.
Right.
But they're all still illegal, and these are substances that we've known about for millennia.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? These are not new things that we've just discovered. And I just wonder why that is. You got substances like alcohol, and I'm not like lobbying for the abolition of alcohol. I don't think that's good.
No.
But you just wonder why things like alcohol that make people so, you listen to the things that we've been talking about with this podcast. We're talking about enlightenment and meaningful experiences that people value their entire lives.
Right.
And then you think about alcohol, and that's sold on every corner, and it's how much value is, I'm not saying that alcohol doesn't give people value. I've gotten value from alcohol, but I've gotten also a lot of embarrassment from alcohol.
Oh, a lot of embarrassment. There's a lot more negative consequences, immediate and long-term, of something like that.
Yeah. I mean, so there's that aspect of it. There's like the drunk driving aspect of it.
Right.
I feel like we were talking about, I feel less physically impaired on psychedelics than I do on alcohol.
I agree.
So
I agree. Well, I told you.
Go ahead.
I took a nice, leisurely stroll through my neighborhood holding hands with my daughter when I was on LSD.
I'm not recommending driving while you're on psychedelics, but I would feel more comfortable doing that than I would driving while I was drunk,
Oh, absolutely.
So, and then there's nicotine, things like that, things that obviously kill you.
Right.
So
I think that the government understands human nature enough to know that we need some relief, that life is hard and we need some relief, and people have always sought it all throughout history. That's why we have a relationship with these drugs that goes back thousands of years.
Yep.
So they can't make it all illegal, but why they choose to make something like nicotine and alcohol perfectly fine, and things like marijuana and magic mushrooms, the opposite, is completely beyond me.
You don't have any ideas? You don't have any thoughts?
I mean, so people will say that if we all did psychedelics, that we would be enlightened, and or at least enough of us would be enlightened, that we would start to question fundamental things about our society, and one of those things might be the power structure.
Sure.
That if we do psychedelics, that will overthrow the government because we'll decide we don't need them anymore, or something like that.
Yeah, I see. I think it's less dramatic than that, and that is kind of where I'm going. I don't think it's necessarily that you're going to have if a bunch of people start doing mushrooms, and I mean, this is a possibility, don't get me wrong, but it's not really where I go, that if a bunch of people start doing mushrooms, everyone's going to rise up and we're actually going to overthrow the government. What I see more is, the amount of people doing psychedelics goes up, and then you have an increased amount of people who are checking out, like Timothy Leary, like that kind of thing.
Yes.
I'm just not going to participate anymore.
Right.
And I think that is maybe in the short term, a revolution is like really scary for a group. But I think long term, people opting out, not buying into it anymore, is like just as big a threat.
Oh, that's interesting. So I'm picturing people doing psychedelics realizing in general what's really important, in life, and then maybe preferring a simpler, less materialistic way of life.
Yeah.
And suddenly big business and their relationship with government suffers. The money, the economy would have to change. I mean, that could be a very dramatic culture changing thing. I agree with you. That's an interesting way of putting it.
And that could be wrong, but I just look at these substances and there's no real threat, and I just wonder why the animosity for these substances.
So I think there's probably some truth to what you just said, and there's also the idea that the government has to be seen as doing something, and one of the things they like to pretend to do is to quote unquote protect us from ourselves.
Keep the streets clean.
Keep the streets
law
clean.
and order.
Yep.
All that happy horse shit.
So there's one thing I thought maybe we can close with this. One story that I wanted to tell you because I thought it was interesting. When I was reading Jung, it kind of struck me. So Jung talks about doing a thing called active imagination, and it's kind of like dreaming while you're awake. You just kind of close your eyes, you get relaxed, and you let thoughts come to your mind. And he says that when that happens, these images and thoughts are coming from the unconscious. So very much like a dream. So I did this. And I was trying to imagine what God is. Just asking that question, trying to imagine and seeing what comes to my mind. And the image that came to my mind was like an endless wall of eyes. It sounds weird. I couldn't see the end of it. It was just eyeballs floating in space, a wall of eyeballs, and they're looking at another wall of eyeballs. So it's like an infinite expanse of eyes, and they're looking at an infinite expanse of eyes. This is the image that came to my mind. And then I'm reading Jung, and he mentions a word, a motif that comes up in dreams, and he calls it polyophthalmia, which just means many eyes. And that this comes up in dream analysis all the time. And he says that the motif points to the peculiar nature of the unconscious, which can be regarded as multiple consciousnesses. And so that's what these eyes represent, multiple consciousnesses. And then I have to, again, point back to that Alex Gray painting that we already talked about, where it's just this geometry
That's
of
exactly
eyes.
What I thought of,
Yeah. So this is tied to this idea of the unconscious or cosmic consciousness, like we've been talking about. And I think that's what the mystic experience is. It's recognizing that the thing that we are is the source and structure of reality. So I don't know if that's a good enough place to end the conversation, but I just thought it was strange that this idea of many eyes popped up in the psychological dream literature, but it also appears in my own imagination.
Well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And in the psychedelic experience.
Didn't you have a psychedelic experience where you took some sort of substance? I think it was mushrooms, and maybe it was acid though. And you were looking in the mirror, and you had kind of a, like that kind of an experience, like the eye seeing the eye.
I did. You're right. I think that was LSD, and they tell you never look in the mirror. Never look in the mirror. So that's the first thing I did. So I do. Yeah. I was standing there looking in the mirror, and if you've ever done that, you're just focusing on one eye. Let's say you can see your reflection in your iris, in your pupil, I think. So that's what I was seeing. I was seeing myself looking at myself, looking at myself, looking at myself, looking at myself in endless, kind of fashion. And it was this very disturbing moment for me. It was like nothing I've ever experienced before. And I think it's tied to this fractal thing that appears over and over again in mystical experiences and in psychedelic experiences. It's something like what we were talking about with DMT, where what reality is consciousness within consciousness within consciousness within consciousness ad infinitum. Yeah.
I think that that's the truth. And I mean, this is all just subjective, but these are things that I'm sure that this is a topic that I'm sure we're going to be coming back to,
Oh yeah.
This is kind of right in the wheelhouse here. Although, I would like to be more specific next time, maybe dial in on something. But I do
Yes.
feel like this is a good primer, a
this
good,
is a
way
good-
to start the
Yeah,
conversation.
absolutely. It's a very high level introduction, and we'll revisit psychedelics from time to time.
Yeah.
And mystical experience and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of all the things that we like to talk about kind of like blend. They kind of all fold into each other. You know what I mean? So I'm
Absolutely.
sure it's all going to be coming back up.
All right. So you guys have that to look forward to.
I also am going to be recording my own solo podcast later this week. So, look forward to that. Tell your friends to listen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I do want to say one more thing because I did a solo podcast the other week, and if anybody hasn't listened to it, check it out. It's
Very good. I loved it.
Oh, good. Thank you. On the topic of religion,
I think it's cool that you did that solo podcast about what it was about, and then now we're kind of talking about psychedelics here, and there's a lot of religious tie over there.
Yep.
And then the solo podcast that I'm going to be doing is kind of going to be about religion in its own way, not necessarily in the same way yours was.
Sure.
But they all kind of complement each other well, so I'm excited to get that out.
I think that'll be good. I think it really will, and then it'll give us something to talk about when we get back together.
Sure.
But I really like that idea, so I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are.
Yep.
And I also, for the people who stuck with us through this almost 2 hours now, I do want to say one thing. When I did my solo podcast, I was very enthusiastically saying things kind of from memory, and there was some factual inaccuracies. So I'm going to tell you, for those people who stuck around long enough, I mentioned the Babylonians quite a bit. And I mentioned Sargon of Akkad, and even though I said Sargon was from Akkad, I referred to him as Babylonian. He was not Babylonian. I also conflated the Babylonian and the Sumerian empires, even though they're close in time and space. They're not the same. So I wanted to clarify that. I realized that was wrong. The other thing I mentioned was a king when I was talking about Sargon, and I said Saddam Hussein had his face on a coin with Sargon on the other side. That was actually King Nebuchadnezzar from much later period in history. But my mind is full of these things. So those were inaccurate, but the rest of it was gold.
Yeah. The Saddam coin thing. Saddam put his face on a coin with a great king from that area. So
Potato.
Yeah, exactly. Easy mistakes to make.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging in there, and until we meet again.
We love you all.
See ya.